Hi, I'm Yesim Nicholson. Welcome back to another episode of Your Big Career Move. Today I'm here with Faris Aranki, and he's no stranger to career changes. He's no stranger to change, full stop. And I'm excited to speak to you, Faris, because you have had a few changes along the way. And I'm really interested to talk to you about what spurred those on, how you've ended up where you are today, and what the future might look like for you as well.
Thank you for inviting me. It's
Um,
lovely to be on the chat.
well, I know that you told me you've done over 400 podcast interviews, so you could possibly do this with your eyes closed, standing on your head. Shall
I
we
mean,
try that?
I'm willing to give that. I've never, do you know, I've never been able to do that standing on your head thing. It looks, I always see people do it on Instagram and stuff, and I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Closest I tried once was some wall press ups, and that did not end well.
Oh,
That was during COVID. There's a funny video of it on YouTube if anyone is bored enough to want to check
oh.
it out.
I'll definitely
Uh,
put a link to that in the show notes then.
okay.
If anybody wants to see Faris doing something silly, then that's I'll put the link in there. But thank you so much for being here. Don't close your eyes. That would just be
Okay.
awkward. And
Yeah.
don't stand on your head. Can we start with where did your career start? Let's start at the
Okay.
beginning.
Start at the beginning. Well, I mean, yeah, what is the beginning, right? Was it when I was aged, 10, helping my mum sell plants at the church fair, or my first job washing dishes when I was 15 in a pub, or at uni, I actually got paid to stay on an extra year at university to be a college president. It was I earned £4,000, so it was under the tax limit, but it was a great first year straight out of uni. But I guess I mentally, all those things are careers and did form, but I guess the first proper thing I did, depending on who you ask, I went and became a school teacher. I went and taught maths and economics. I know, two very glamorous subjects. People out there are going, could he be any cooler? I taught these two subjects for 6 years, and I taught secondary school.
And why? Why did you decide to go into teaching?
So I went into teaching. So I graduated and I left university at a time there was something called a dot-com burst. So the economy wasn't great. There weren't a lot of regular jobs. They were suddenly rescinded, and actually, in some ways, we're seeing similarities across other periods in time. So I had always thought I'd just get a graduate job. I'd go and work in corporate, do what everyone does. But there weren't a lot of those jobs. So very just pragmatically, I was like, well, I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to compete for a smaller pool of jobs. What do I want to do at this point in life? Do you know what? I'd love to go and explore Latin America. But instead of just backpacking like everyone does, can I justify a way of going there and getting paid to go there? And I was like, oh, teaching, I can teach. I don't have a teaching qualification. I don't have any proof points. But I have a good friendship with a professor of mine who used to be a headmaster in schools in Latin America. So I said, Tony, could you please write me a nice reference letter and send it to all your mates who are headmasters of schools, which he kindly did. And then two schools offered me a chance to a 2 month trial. And I took one of those. And I ended up teaching at the British School of El Salvador, which initially was meant to be for 2 months. 6 years later, I was still teaching in a different school because yeah, after 2 months, the headmaster gave me a 2 year contract. And then once I had that experience, other schools were like, hey, we'll take him. We'll take him. So,
So
yeah, I sort of stumbled into
did
teaching.
I hear that right? You didn't have any qualifications as a
Nope, I had my
teacher.
degree.
You just went, oh, I think I can teach. Let me
Yeah,
just see if I can.
yeah. It was
Love it.
basically, yeah.
Okay. I mean, first of all, we have to dissect that because I think to just have the confidence, or was it naivety? What was it that made you think, well, this is something I can do despite having no qualifications? Because that's one thing that my clients, I hear again and again, oh, I don't have any qualifications or experience in this area, but I'm really drawn to it. I really want to go into it. And for a lot of people, that's a massive roadblock. So what was it for you that made you think, oh well, I don't have qualifications, but I'll give it a go.
I guess so. I'd done a double degree of maths and economics, and as part of that, this the setup of the university is you have to, as you get into your more senior years, you mentor or teach people in their first year. Some of the syllabus is. And I also found that I was teaching some of my friends, particularly the maths, who were economists who couldn't do the maths part. I was teaching them the maths to help them get through their exams because there's a lot of maths in economics, and they did not appreciate this. They'd come from history and sort of a social, side. So I had that confidence that I'd been doing tutoring, I'd been doing sort of mentoring. And I thought, well, it's no different to that, right? And on a practical sense, obviously there are differences. Like managing 30 kids at the same time is does take a skill.
Mm.
Um, and I had spent a gap year before university where I had actually done TEFL. So I had been teaching TEFL.
Right.
So I did have a proof point. But really, what I'd always sort of been encouraged to is don't you shoot down your own ideas, right? If the idea is going to be shot down, let somebody else shoot it down. So I was like, well, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. The schools will feedback like, we don't want this guy.
Yeah.
But at least let me not be the person who shoots down that idea.
Yeah.
So I was like, let's get the letter written. Let's see. And you know what? I was right. Schools, fortunately for me, were that desperate for maths teachers in particular. They were like, we'll take a punt on this kid for two
Hmm.
months, 2 month risk. Right? And to be clear, in those 2 months, I wasn't paid very much. But
Right.
once I proved myself, then that unlocked a bigger contract, much higher payback. So, as my dad has always told me, you've got to back yourself at some point in life,
Yeah.
right?
Brilliant
So yeah,
advice.
I guess that was one of my first backing myself.
Yeah, good for you. So you spent 6 years in El Salvador. Was it
Well, I
San
moved
Salvador?
around. I moved, yeah, El Salvador. San Salvador is the capital.
Okay.
I spent 2.5 years in El Salvador, and then I moved on, and I also ended up teaching in Nepal and in Palestine, and then back in North London in Tottenham.
And did you just fancy moving to different countries? Was it just part of this adventure
Yeah,
that you fancied
it
going
was
on?
part of the adventure. The adventure
Mm,
was less about teaching and more about exploring the world,
yeah.
and living in those cultures. So I used the teaching as a vehicle to do that. And yeah, I had some vastly different experiences. Latin culture, Nepali culture, Middle Eastern culture, all quite different
Yeah.
setups, different kinds of teaching environments. So it really was a great 6 years in terms of letting me see the world.
Yeah, amazing. What an amazing adventure you've been on. And so you end up back in England.
Yeah,
And at what point did you decide actually this teaching profession perhaps isn't the right profession for me?
for me. So teaching in a state school in England is quite different to teaching in an international school or in a little village school. And that really brought home the complexities and the challenges of teaching. Right? And that was at that point I began to think, is this going to be my career for life? And I always say I've got a lot of respect for teachers because it's not just a 9 to 5, it's a vocation. And you don't get paid very much for that vocation. And once I saw the grim realities, and to be for context, I was in a school that wasn't a great school. There were metal detectors on the doors. The kids would tell you to F off all the time. They would actually say, I'm going to stab you, and you would believe some of them.
Wow.
Right. So it was more social services. And I was like, actually, this isn't fun anymore. This isn't my vocation. And it reminded me that actually I'd only gone into teaching as a temporary thing. So it was time to go back to plan A, which was go into the corporate world.
How does somebody make a transition from, because I know that you transitioned to the corporate world, but we also
Yeah.
have to talk about the accidental modeling at some point as well that you
Okay,
fell
that's
into.
later.
I'm not going
That's
to let
far
you
later.
off not talking about that.
You're not going to let me off not talking
No.
about that. So I naively, with the same naivety of, hey, I can be a teacher, I went, oh, I can work in industry. I can work for a big corporate. So I went on the internet. I found 30 jobs that I went, oh, yeah, I could do that. And I wrote to them. So this time it was me writing, not my university professor. And I sent my CV. I applied for the job, whatever. It was the formal way of applying for the job. Of the 30 that I applied for, 29 never even got back to me. Didn't even have the decency to say, sorry, you're not getting the job. I got one letter back, one email from an HR director, which I'll paraphrase, but basically said, I don't know why you applied for this job. You're a teacher. You should stay being a teacher. And that, A, really annoyed me because I was like, he can't see past the label of the teacher. But B, gave me a really important lesson is like, how you label yourself is really vital. So the next, and it also taught me that perhaps I'd been aiming a little bit too high because I'd sort of targeted just mid-level jobs that kind of said you need 6 years experience. And I was like, well, I've got 6 years experience, but 6 years experience of teaching.
Something else.
So,
What kind of jobs were they?
so they were like analyst jobs in companies or, senior consultant roles, you know, so they were, I wasn't going for management roles. I was going for, look, I've got these analytical skills already.
Hmm.
So the first thing I decided, I changed my strategy. I said, okay, I'm going to go a level lower in the jobs I'm going to go for. I'm going to target graduate jobs, which I hadn't done previously, even though I'm not a graduate anymore. I graduated 6 years ago. And the second thing I did was take off my CV the label of a teacher. Okay.
Okay.
I changed on my CV. I said expert communicator, able to stand in front of large crowds for 8 hours a day, think on their feet, simplify the complex, and get key messages through. And people were like, "Hey,
So
we
hang
want
on.
one of those."
This is really fascinating. So most people on their CV would put the
Yeah.
heading, that which is generally the job title,
Mhm.
manager of blah 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 or director of blah 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 or teacher or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really getting into the detail here,
Yeah.
but
It's
I'm
fine.
doing this for good reason because I speak to many, many teachers
Yeah.
who, I always say I feel very conflicted about NHS and teachers because they're um, full of people who went into the job for all the right reasons and sadly leaving in drones because they're so disillusioned and burnt out by the profession. So I do end up working with a lot of teachers in the work that I do. And so I'm always very conflicted. But one of the things that comes up is, well, I'm a teacher. I've always been a teacher. And how do I make this transition into doing something else?
Yeah.
So I'm going into the real practical stuff with you
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you get away with not putting some kind of job title like
Why do you
teacher?
have Why do you have to put a job title, right?
Okay.
Stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's telling you, right? So don't conform to society. Remember, a CV is to help the reader understand you. If you're lazy, and I'm going to use aggressive language, if you're lazy just to use labels, don't be surprised people judge you on those labels, right?
Hmm.
Um, so unpack your labels. Really sing your the song you want to sing, not the song that a label is saying. And it's amazing that reframing it just stimulates different conversations. In the world of creativity, there's famous studies where they say to somebody, "Tell me if you show them a candle and say, tell me 10 ways we could use this candle." They'll come up with 10 ways. But if you separated and you said, "Can you give me 10 ways to use a lump of wax and a piece of string?" You'd get completely different answers.
Mm.
And what is a lump of wax and a piece of string? It's a candle, just explained in a different way. So why not, instead of using the label of a candle, explain it how you want to explain it, depending on the answers you want to get. So that's just how my brain worked. I was like, and that was the valuable lesson from the HR director. He's like, he could not look past the label. He's a senior person in an organization that I want to work for. I need to help him, just like I used to help the kids.
So is that, I mean, you're making it sound very simple. Like this HR director told me this. So I went, I know, well, good lesson. Thanks very much, HR director. So as a
Yeah,
result of this, I'm going to do this.
yeah.
And you make it sound very simple. Was it very simple to you, or was it a
Well,
process
I've
of,
cut out. I've cut
okay, I've
out.
got to lick my wounds, I've got to rethink my strategy,
Yes.
and it took a little while for you to work out how to do that.
Yes, I simplified it. And I'm telling the story how I would act now.
Yeah.
What is the reality? And this is what happens to most people. Is these things are simple, but what I have cut out is the emotional side of it. The getting pissed off, the feeling sorry for yourself, the denial. Well,
The
it can't be
victim.
the
Yeah.
victim, right?
Mm.
Right. And that's what complicates life, right? So if you can navigate through that, then there is always a simple answer. Oh, right, I've been given this piece of feedback. If I put it in place, I'll do it. And obviously, there's interpretation, right? And I would always say to people, don't change your behaviors on one piece of information, right? Be like a journalist, go and validate it with two or three other sources. But then if it keeps coming back the same information, do something with it, right? Change the behavior, change the action. But yeah, that emotional side is the biggest thing, right? And that's why I do what I do today, because actually, and we'll come on to that, decision making is easy, but dealing with emotions is really difficult. And even very logical people, very senior people, have the difficulty of dealing with that emotion, whatever situation they're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, well, it's such a human thing, isn't it? And a lot of us do struggle with decision making. And I think nowadays we are suffering from decision fatigue as well. That, like the constant, what am I going to have for breakfast? Should I go to bed or should I watch another episode of this Netflix something? It's just constant, isn't it? So
Yeah, yeah.
I can understand why some people really struggle with just making really good decisions or decisions that lead to good outcomes. So anyway, we've totally gone off track.
We
So
have, but
you
I love it.
completely, is it fair to say you redesigned your CV?
I did. I learnt, and it was an iterative process, right? Because I kept applying, and each time I'd look at the feedback. Had it been successful? Had it got me through to the next round? If not, I would change something. Again, that's something I've always been taught from a mathematical point of view, scientific.
Yeah.
Everything in life, I always say to people, is just an experiment.
Hmm.
Right? You are only walking through life with hypotheses. Your decisions are just hypotheses. Should I do A or B? I don't know the answer, but I'm going to try A for 10 times. If it doesn't work, I'm going to tweak it and then try. So yeah, I was iterating, but over time, my CV really changed. How I communicated really changed, and what I saw was the results started to flow through. Right, I went from a place where nobody accepted me, and admittedly, I'd gone down a level to being accepted on so many different graduate schemes. Literally,
Wow.
I was doing like an assessment center a week, and I became really good at assessment centers. Right, I just aced them, and I think I had about 14 offers of graduate jobs
Wow.
um, off the back of that because yeah, it just became a fun game almost in my
Yeah.
head. Like I'm going to another assessment center, they're going to do this because they all become formulaic. Um, and so it really was a turnaround in outcomes.
Yeah. Most people, not most people, but probably if you looked on average, you'd have more people leaving the corporate world to do something more meaningful and
Yeah,
becoming a teacher
yeah,
rather than the way that you did it, going from teaching to corporate is
yeah.
probably less,
Common, yeah.
yeah, it's less common.
Yeah, it is.
So
It is.
what was it about the corporate world that you were like, that could be me?
Um, well, having, I think, social conditioning really, both on two aspects. I'd gone to a good school, I'd gone to a good university. That was sort of the expectation of the conveyor belt. You go into a corporate world. At the time, my dad was in the corporate world as well. He ran his own business, but it was very financial institutions, that sort of thing. So, I'd grown up around that. And so it just seemed like the natural place to go that, that people like me did, but also as a measurement of success,
Hmm.
weirdly, right? How quickly you climb the corporate ladder, how big your salary is. These are all, whether you realize it or not, massive sort of factors and an imprint on people who live in a Western society. And it's very hard to swim against that tide at times.
Yeah. Well, you did initially, didn't you? And
I
then
did
you found your
initially,
way
and
back
actually,
to the tide.
I'm so grateful I did because a lot of the skills that I picked up as a teacher have served me fantastically throughout the rest of my career. And so it was almost like having a head start. And that was shown when I joined the graduate scheme that I joined. I
What
had a
sort of
range
things? What were
I
your
had a range of soft
transferable,
skills,
yeah,
a
soft
range of
skills?
soft
Yeah.
skills, right? Communication being the number one, right? Honestly, as a teacher, you've got to stand up every day in front of 30 kids and communicate. And kids are difficult. Well, they're good in one sense. They're very honest, right? I'm bored. I don't get it, right?
Yeah.
Which adults pretend they go, no, no, I got it. No, no, of course I was paying attention, right? But with kids, you get live feedback all the time, right? So you have to get good at communicating. Otherwise, they're going to get frustrated. They're not going to pass their grades. You're going to get frustrated. So communication is the big one, right?
What does
People
good
skills.
communication mean to you? And I ask because, and he'll probably listen to this at some point, but one of my clients
Yeah,
is a teacher, and I was looking at his CV for him just yesterday, in fact, and he put one of his skills, communication.
yeah,
And I sort of did question that because I'm like, we all communicate. It's just that
yes.
some of us are quite good at it and others are really rubbish at it. So what is it about your communication that makes it a skill that's worth writing about? So I'm interested
Okay.
to hear when you say you became good at communicating, what does
Yeah.
that actually mean?
Okay, great question. So let's unpack it. I became really, and I teach communication now. So
Yes.
I've had a lot of chance to reflect and think about it. But I became really good at understanding what was the objective I was trying to achieve, which sounds silly to say that, but a lot of
Not at
people
all.
don't know why they even open their mouths or
Yeah.
why they start. I got really good at understanding the people in front of me, the person I was communicating to. What did they like? Because communication, spoiler alert, is not about you. It's about the other person. How do they like to receive messages? What words do they like? What style? Do they like, flowery language? Do they like pictures? Do they like detail? I learned to understand that. And with 30 kids in each classroom, there's a lot of variety. Some kids like it A, some like it B. Uh, and then I learned to sort of encompass those different styles. Sometimes we're going to have to do this, sometimes we're going to have to do that. So that's what for me, really good communication is. It's more about the receive than the broadcast.
Yeah.
But you can only send out a message if A, you know what message you want to send, and B, you know about your listener, and then you do it in a nice, engaging way.
Beautifully put. Very beautifully communicated, Faris.
Thank you. um,
Just going to
and
take a sip of water,
take
sorry.
a sip while you're doing that. But do you know what? I didn't appreciate just how much teaching gave me those skills. I just assumed everyone had those skills. It wasn't until I got into the corporate world and was la 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 compared against my peers and I was said, well, hang on a minute, you seem to be ahead of everyone. I'm like, well, I'm 6 years older. Right? And I've had another career. So, there's a reason I can communicate. I can motivate. I can understand people. It's because I've been doing it for
Yeah.
6 years. But also, when I looked around at the people who were meant to be my bosses or my leaders, I was like, hang on a minute, these guys are terrible communicators. These people are not inspirational. I went into business and I couldn't wait to meet these inspirational captains of industry that I read about in the Financial Times. And I'm like, where are they? There aren't.
Yeah.
It turns out there aren't inspirational people around every corridor in every business.
So true. But you don't know that if you're not in it. You just
Yeah,
assume that, uh, especially big corporates, I think I always assumed that if it's a successful business, then it must have people in there that really know what they're talking about. And like you say, communicate really, really well and inspire their teams and la la. La. And you go, oh, actually, maybe that assumption could be questioned.
yeah,
So interesting. Um, I'm interested to know, like you said, this is your second career. You've done six
yeah,
years of teaching, and then essentially you've gone back and
yeah,
started as a graduate, which,
yeah.
you weren't a recent graduate. And
No,
I was wondering whether there was any part of you, was there an ego thing at all for you where you were
yeah.
like,
Great
actually,
question. Yeah, and there could have been, right? Because A, I was older than
mm-hmm,
but also, so the company I joined, so I did have a range of options. I joined this company called Centrica, they
mm-hmm,
oil and gas, right? And the reason I joined them is because they said, look, it's a 3 year training program, graduate training program. But if you show the skills at any point during that 3 years, you can come off the scheme and take a permanent job at a higher salary. Right? And because I was backing myself, that what I've been taught by my dad, I said, great. I don't expect to be on this for 3 years. You've made it explicit. It is clear we are thing because I do realize I've got some other skills. So I always had that mindset. So I joined Centrica, but there was an ego because everyone's younger than me. But also the thing about the Centrica graduate scheme is they said you've got to start at the bottom. Right? You have two options when you join the scheme. You either start on the telephones answering calls to real customers so you can understand what their frustrations are, or you learn how to fix boilers and you go out and fix people's boilers, go into their houses and listen to them as you're fixing their boilers.
brilliant.
Brilliant. I loved it.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. Right. But a lot of my peers would moan, I've got a
Oh,
degree. I've got a 2-1 from this university. Why should I have to answer a telephone? Why
mm,
should I? Right. And I was like, hey, buddy, nobody's too good to answer a telephone, right? And we're getting paid 30 grand to answer a phone, whereas everyone around us is getting paid 12 grand. And P.S., we shouldn't tell them that we're getting more because we're on a graduate scheme, right? I was staggered by the level of sort of ego that came across. And I think that helped me deal with my own ego because I was more worried about that I'm 6 years older than everyone
Hmm.
side of things. So having quite arrogant people around me was actually helpful because I was
Yeah.
like, God, I'm glad I'm not like that, right? Too good to answer a phone. I learned so much. And because I had this secret grand plan of I'm going to come off this graduate scheme sooner rather than later, I wasn't really worried what level I came in.
And did you come off the graduate scheme sooner or later? Which was
I
it?
did. It was sooner. Within 9 months, I would taken a permanent job in the company.
Right.
And I didn't expect to be quite that quick, but it was, yeah, really, really good. And then that kicked on from there.
Amazing. And so how long did you stay there?
So I was 4 years with Centrica, and I
Hmm.
ended up in their strategy team, actually using my maths and economics that I used to teach, and sort of doing all this kind of analytics and modeling. And it was really great to get a macro picture of the energy industry and how it all fitted together. Um, and in that fourth year, I got approached by a headhunter who said, "Hey, your skills would be perfect for strategy consulting, and they paid way more than you're currently earning. Would you be interested in going for an interview?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, right." So I went for an interview, and I got given a job in strategy consulting, and so I switched careers into the world of consulting.
And how did that go? Was it a very big change?
So consulting is quite a change because in two aspects, really. One is the level, the caliber of the people you work with, if I'm honest, right? That we famously say in consulting, but also in law and in banking, it is full of insecure overachievers.
Right.
Okay, which you don't get in industry. Certainly, God bless Centrica and other companies that were did. You don't have the creme de la creme sat in a room side by side, all pushing each other without even saying any words, like going, "Oh yeah, well, I was top of my year at Cambridge. I was top of my year at Harvard. I was top of my year." Right? That's the kind of when I was at peak consulting years, kind of McKinsey. That's what happens. You don't actually need a manager in the room to say work harder because everyone just goes, "Well, I'm used to working 18-hour days and I want to really solve this problem in a day."
And did you
So
find
the
yourself sort of being drawn into this culture of, is it one-upmanship or is it, I don't know, how would
Yeah,
you
it
describe it?
it is a little bit. Yeah, you're either competing with other people or you're competing with yourself.
Right.
Going, well, I haven't used my full potential in the last 4 years, right? I've been
Hmm.
coasting, let's be honest, in certain aspects.
Yeah.
Um, so it's different for each person in that room, but that's why the definition of an insecure overachiever is very apt. So certainly, I did like raise my game, and I went into it eyes open, going, actually, I'm ready to work a little bit harder and push myself because you learn so much quicker as a
Hmm.
result.
Hmm.
But the other thing that was a culture shock that took some adaptation is if you step into professional services, you need to suddenly get into marketing. And what I mean by that is in a regular job and in my teaching in when I work for Centrica, you have a line manager. You have somebody who sees your performance day in, day out and can judge you. In consulting or law, you do not have that, right?
Hmm.
Because no two people are doing the same job. Everyone, you do a little project here, then you move on to the next project, then the next project. In the space of a year, you might do 6 projects with 6 different managers. So nobody has got a golden thread of how have you done,
Yeah.
but you get judged against each other.
Mm.
So you hope that all the inputs go in, but no, what really happens is people market themselves around the business saying, "Do you know how good a job I've done?" So it's not just enough to be doing a good job. You have to invest efforts in telling people about how you. And in
Hmm.
my first year, that was a real culture shock to me. I wasn't used to doing that. I was like, oh, well, I don't feel comfortable going and telling a senior director about how awesome I am. But B, I was just so busy trying to get up to speed with all my peers, I didn't have the time to go for all these coffees and put together. But I learned that was a key part of it. And if you didn't do that, you wouldn't rise as quickly in an organization. So that was a big culture shock, and that took sort of about 12 months to get my head around.
And was that part of your plan to rise through the ranks as quickly as possible, or
I think
did you
initially
just
when I
get
joined,
sucked into
it was more I
that
got
way of
sucked in.
thinking? Mm.
I think I got into consulting. Initially, I said, "Well, I'll just see where it takes me, and I'll learn a lot in 4 years." But you get sucked in pretty quickly, and you get sort of blinkered. Like, I got to get promoted. I got to get to partner. I got to. It gets super competitive. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, I can quite imagine. So how long did you manage to
So
breathe
I did.
and Eat and breathe that culture.
So I did surprisingly well. I survived 12 years,
Wow.
four different firms.
Hmm.
I always got sort of a boss would leave or someone would leave and take me with them, which is always the tip I give to people, right? It's great if you find great people, attach yourself to them and they'll be the gift that keeps on giving. And particularly, and yeah, in the 12 years, I managed to go from consultant to partner, across the four firms. So yeah, I managed to nail it and get over myself. But it was a lot of hard work to do. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it's a lot of hard work to get there and to stay there.
Mm.
Um, People
When
think
you
you reach
say
the top of the
hard
ladder.
work,
Yeah,
are we
yeah,
talking, when you say hard, do you mean it was long hours or it was actually very difficult work that used your brain a lot? What
both.
is,
So it's long
right.
hours. It's long hours. It's not a 9 to 5. Yeah, and not just the physical hours, as in you're sat in an office, but in the time I was in consulting, it was what they call the 5-4-3 model. I was away every week
Yeah.
in a city in Europe or the Middle East, in a hotel. So you're making sacrifices to your personal life. You're pretty much only coming back for the weekends, and then you fly back out again.
Yeah.
So there is that commitment, and then that breeds into working longer hours because you're in a foreign city. You don't have any. The client assumes, and they're paying high volume. But it is also using parts of your brain. Like I said, we would solve problems in 2 weeks that when I was at Centrica, would have 2 months to solve.
Which
So
again
yeah,
is a steep learning curve, I suppose, isn't it?
100%. You learn so much so quickly. That's why it's a good place for anyone, even for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Okay?
You'd recommend it.
I would recommend it if it's not for everyone. If you're that kind of thing, certainly you learn a lot. But you also, you do a lot of drudgery stuff as well, right? Consultants think they'll be working on the glamorous side of, cutting edge strategies. Sometimes it's just a lot of project management.
Yeah, I can imagine. So after 12 years of that,
Yes.
what was the tipping point for you to say goodbye to that?
Yeah. So I started working with a great coach, nominally to help me unlock higher levels of sales and getting further up the tree. But what she helped me I realize is that I lost the passion for the job. I'd sort of morphed into doing stuff that the company needed me to do, not what I was enjoying on a
Hmm.
day-to-day basis anymore.
Hmm.
And once it's a bit like a spacesuit. Once you've got a rip in your spacesuit, the spacesuit is now obsolete, right? Again, that emotional side, it might take you time to get to grips with it. But once you go, oh, actually, yeah, I'm going to depressurize here. So it then became like, what am I going to do next? And so I worked with that coach to work that out.
Is this a
And
coach that you paid for yourself? You found your for yourself,
so
or did the
ironically, it was
company?
from the company. The
Yeah.
company paid because to help me, as I said, get to senior partner.
Hmm.
Whereas junior partner bills X million, senior partner bills, way more than that. And then, so it was for their benefit. But
Yeah.
but really, this was a great coach because they were on my side. And they were like, well,
Yeah.
let's work out what's right for
Which
you.
is how it should be.
It's how it should be. So
Yeah.
somebody else was paying for the checks. I now pay for her checks because I kept that coach even though I left the company.
Oh,
So she helped me work out what I did want to do through great techniques. But even once you see what you like on paper, then you're still like, well, how do I make that happen?
hmm.
And the sort of analytical side of me was like, let's look for other jobs that give me all those things. And I couldn't find any job that ticked all the boxes of the things I enjoyed. And that's when she then planted the seed. Well, if you're so certain what you like, why don't you build it? And that's what started my next career. I left to start my own company and to build something that I would enjoy day to day.
Yes. I know that you've read at least some of my book,
Yes,
and there is
read
a
all of it.
section. Oh, you've read all of it. Awesome. So you would have read the section where I talk about if it doesn't exist, build it.
Yes,
And it sounds like that's exactly what you went off and did.
it's exactly what I did. Yeah, I made up a nebulous job that somehow people buy. But yes, I built it, and
And
I'm
that's
still
what you're
building.
doing now.
That's what I'm doing now.
Yeah,
Celebrated the
it's
5 year anniversary of my business end of last year.
oh, this is exciting. So five
Yeah,
years in. So do you want
yeah,
to talk us through what you're doing now?
yeah. So having been a big brain for hire, I came to the conclusion that if you only need a big brain for a group of individuals, you won't achieve much. Because if you solve another person's problem, it's not their solution. And they will easily dismiss your solution, even if they paid £5 million for it, which was often the case.
Hmm.
But if you can facilitate them to come up with the answer and deal with all their emotional demons along the way, which is, oh, but I like this idea, but Bob next to me doesn't like the idea, and I don't know how to tell Bob I don't like, yeah. Or I like this idea, but I'm doing too many other things. Or I don't actually understand this idea, but I don't feel confident enough to say in a room of senior people.
Mm.
So, and I was really good, thanks to my teaching skills, of sorting all that stuff out with senior executives. So I said, I'm going to create a company that helps teams get a sharper strategy by getting them working better together, right? Getting them more focused, right? I'm going to facilitate them through that. And so that's the business I run today. We offer facilitation and training services to get the best out of teams, break down those barriers that sit inside our heads, inside teams, so that they can make the best decisions and run the best businesses. And it's a joy to do.
Yeah. Who was your first client?
So that's always interesting. My first client was somebody I did not see at all. They were not on my radar. I took a very analytical approach to trying to find my first client. It failed spectacularly, and I can tell a story about that. In the meantime, a somebody I had trained 15 years before had seen a post of mine on LinkedIn saying, I've created a new business. And he sent me a message. He said, I don't know if you remember me, but 15 years ago, you trained me and you taught me something that changed my career. Uh, and so we jumped on a call and he took me through it. And he explained to me something I'd said to him in a training session that had then helped him to deal with difficult conversations. And he used it even today that he was senior. He said, anytime I have to go into a difficult conversation, I hear your voice in my head.
How awesome is that? What was the training that you'd done 15 years previously?
So I still do the same training. It was around
Okay.
influencing. I remember he was doing a role play. He had to fire someone,
Yeah.
an actor, and he was really struggling because he was too nice a person. And the piece of advice I gave him when on the third attempt, I said, stop. I said, what you're doing is too nice. I said, if you've got a difficult message, you have to rip the band-aid off and then you can be nice. You cannot be nice before you rip the band-aid. Right? So
Brilliant
just
advice.
go in, rip the bloody band-aid. And so he said, anytime I have a difficult conversation, I just hear your voice say, go in, rip the bloody band-aid. Right? And he said, and then I'm nice. Right? And
Mm.
it just changes the dynamic. So yeah, it's a simple piece of advice, but until someone just stops you and says, right. So yeah,
But
he
how
said, I want to,
lovely that all this time
how
later, a
lovely.
decade and a half later,
Decade and a
he
half
still
later,
had your voice in his head in the best possible way.
in the best possible way. And he was senior and he was a budget holder. And he said, I want you to come in now and train my juniors what you trained me 15 years ago.
Amazing.
So he was my first client.
Love it. And then is it fair to say it snowballed from there, or was it
It
a bit
stopped
more
and
of a
started with COVID.
squiggly?
It was squiggly. No
Okay.
businesses thing. And we had COVID in between. So the business really died a death in that point. But since then, it's been much healthier. It's grown very quickly. So fast forward now, 5 years in, team of six. We've got a clients. We've signed our 50th client last year.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, and the future's looking very bright and positive.
Amazing. I love that. I want to talk about your dad
Okay.
because actually your at least on LinkedIn, your relationship reminds me a little bit of the comedian Jack Whitehall and his dad, whose name escapes me right now.
Oh yeah,
That there's like this clearly a huge amount of love between you.
yeah.
And then there's also a little bit of ribbing and a little bit of your dad, like, I mean, if you don't follow Faris on LinkedIn yet, then I urge you to follow him. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes. But Faris is posts at least once per day, and it's always interesting, observational stuff. I really enjoy your content, and and then there's a comment from his dad, which is, just I just don't want you to get above your station, Faris, but also, oh my God, I'm rooting for you. And
Yeah.
it's really entertained me because I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, I have to say, of
Okay.
what does Faris's dad think about what Faris has just posted. I think you two should just have a show together. But
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, so
But
can we talk about him and
yeah,
how he's influenced you in your career and maybe
yes.
your mum as well?
Yes, yeah, no, because they are, and she's not on LinkedIn. Otherwise, she would be even more commenting. All her comments come to me directly on WhatsApp.
Okay.
Um, I should just do a screen print of those. But look, I wouldn't be the person I am without the two of them. All right, and I'm sure, suffice to say, I'm sure my siblings would say the same because, for context, they are two amazing people who are immigrants to the UK who made the best of a bad deal that had been given. They were displaced from their homes, but they didn't let that be a barrier.
How old would they have been then, Faris?
They would have been in their late 20s.
Okay.
Um,
And they
so
came over together to the UK?
no, they had met in Beirut in Lebanon
Yeah.
in a university, and because of the war happening in Palestine, they couldn't go back. My dad came initially to the UK to do a PhD, so they were separated for several years, and then he invited his girlfriend over, and he married her within a couple of weeks so that she could stay in the country. And that's my mum. In case spoiler alert. So they came. Yes, that's how they came in the early 70s.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so
Um,
we've got the context. So son
got the
of
context.
immigrants.
Yeah, son of immigrants, and my dad. It's a bit of a classic sort of division of labor. My mum raised us while my dad was earning the money, and he had multiple careers. So initially, he used his degree as an engineer to make money working for somebody else, but realized that was only going to take him so far. So he taught himself the financial institutions and started his own finance company from scratch and made a success of that. You know how in the 80s convinced people that he was a safe pair of hands to invest their money on their behalf was very impressive. But he did that for a good range of years until there were one too many cycles, economic cycles proved to be a bit too much. To which point he pivoted again and he took up a job at the BBC, reading the news every day on BBC Arabic radio, based off the strength of you say, where do I get my bullshiness? In the 60s, he had done one show for them as an intern. And so he just wrote to them sort of 40 years later saying, look, I've worked for you before. You should hire me as your, I know I'm kind of jumping, but he did end up being one of their main presenters on the radio every day. So really inspiring stuff that if you back yourself, you can change careers, you can make a success. Yes, there's a lot of hard work underneath. Um, so yeah, the pair of them have provided the platform and the inspiration to go on and do good things.
Did they fill you with confidence as you were growing up to believe that you could do whatever you set your mind to? Is it something that they were very overt about and, giving you advice on that? Or do you think you just accepted that by osmosis by observing how they were?
No, I think it's more the former, right? You talk to any, and it's not just my parents, immigrant parents, right? So they set high expectations. No, there isn't. What are these B's and C's? No, we expect A's. Come on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Slacker.
no, no. Don't. Yeah, slacker. Don't tell me. Yeah, no. My mum was like, no, you all have to learn two instruments. This is not negotiable, right? So it was just this level of expectation of, we're giving you a good platform. This is what we expect. Which, let's be honest, as a child can be frustrating as well. You're like, I just want to go and do this, right?
Yeah.
But without that sort of expectation setting opportunity. And I saw that when I was a teacher for kids who didn't have the opportunity. Do you blame the kids or, it's tough when you've been handed a rough, set of cards, so to speak. So, yeah, I think it was, of course, they gave us inspiration and kind words, but it was also, this is what we want you to achieve.
What do they think of what you're doing now?
Terrible. My mum won't mind me sharing the story. I often tell the story. Of course, she doesn't feel it. But when I told them I was leaving my job to start a company, my mum's response, she went very quiet. And when I chatted to her one on one, she said to me, what have I done in life? My son, he's now has no job, no house, no wife. I've failed as a mother. Because that's how she saw starting a business as sort of a bit of a failure if you'd gone from having a very good prestigious job that you can boast about. Of course, now she is massively supportive. She is massively a fan. But yeah, whereas my dad, because he'd started his own business, has always been a cheerleader. He acts like a de facto chairman to the business, asking
Excellent.
me each week, "What have you achieved? Why are we not going faster? Why are we not doing more?" And that's great to have a sounding board. It can be
Yeah.
irritating at times, but that's the reality.
And somebody that's going to hold you accountable actually is really powerful. And, I see that with my clients as well. I think we think that children need somebody to hold them accountable, but actually, as adults, we sort of need
Oh,
that as well. And I think that's why a lot of people are actually better off in employment rather than being self-employed or founder of blah blah blah, because then you've got a manager who's sitting there going, "Have you done this? Have you done that?" And a lot of people do need that accountability. And if you don't have a parent or a partner or a best friend or somebody, a coach who's going to hold you accountable, it is easy to slip, isn't it?
it is. It is. Yeah, super important, right? And it's why I talk a lot about networks when you go it alone. If you don't have networks, you're going to really find it difficult.
Yeah. And but having a dad that's holding you accountable is probably a little bit annoying, but then actually quite useful, probably. We won't tell him that. That
We
can be
won't
our
tell him that.
can be
I'll,
our little
I'll,
secret, and hopefully he'll never
I'll tell
listen
him not
to
to watch
us.
the last 10 minutes of this.
Does he listen to all your, I mean, you said you've done 400 podcast interviews. Has he listened to all of them?
I think he stopped listening to every single one, but in the early days, he would listen to all of them, and I'd get a critique. I'd get a sort of feedback. But I was telling a friend last night, so I do post every day on LinkedIn. I have done for 3 years now. It's as much a journal for me as anything else.
Hmm.
It's a great way for me to sharpen. And the only person who literally reads everything is Dad. Um,
Right.
and initially, it was weird. I'll be honest, right? Getting feedback on your posts.
Hmm.
Initially, it wasn't public. I'd get sort of messages. Why have you just said this? Why have you shared that with the world? But in all honesty, it has changed the relationship to a new level because every Sunday or Saturday when I pop round, they have speaker notes. They like, we want to talk about what happened to you this week, right? They get a level of insight into my week, that they might not have had otherwise. And it's initially it was weird, but it's nice now, right? It really does. It's added a new dimension as we've got older in life. And so, I try and explain this to people who tell me that they're really nervous about posting on social media. I say it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? It can actually have some positives like this.
Yeah. I mean, does it make you think twice about what you're going to post because your dad's going to be watching
Yeah, it's a
or
little bit like
reading?
Schrodinger's cat. But that was something I grappled with years ago. So when I lived in Nepal, um, I started to journal. So I did a blog for the first time in my life. Um, and it became clear, and I was sporadic in the early days, and it became clear I got a message from my gran saying she looked forward to reading it every day. And that
That's so
changed the
nice.
frequency that I wrote, but also the style that I wrote because I was conscious that my grandmother was reading every day, and I
Mm,
sort of toned down my language and the kind of the shock stories that I. So and that, but that's useful, right? I always say the journaling is useful to help you process your thoughts, and they shouldn't necessarily always be unfiltered.
yeah.
So yeah.
But it's interesting, the whole creating content with your audience in mind is obviously hugely important. And actually, when I was writing my book, I had three or four people whose story I was intimately familiar with, who were basically the people that I was writing the book for. And so every word that I wrote, I was running it through the filter of, would they find this useful? How would it affect them? How would it affect their beliefs, the beliefs that they have about themselves or about careers in general? And it was actually a really, really useful filter to write the book through, if that makes
Mm,
sense.
it makes complete sense. Yeah.
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 So it's interesting that I guess you're doing that to an extent with your LinkedIn. I don't know, you're probably not writing it with your dad in mind, but maybe subconsciously you know that he's going to be reading it.
He is a factor, but it's other people as well now,
Yeah.
right? I get messages. from the strangest places.
I
Um,
bet.
I've reached a point, so particularly in the last 18 months, it seems to have kicked on. Um, and I get things that I never expected, both positive and negative, right? Positive camp, you are an inspiration. I read every day. I'm grappling with the similar thing. Like, I'll give you an example. 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was evicted from my flat. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but the landlord doubled the price because of thing, and she evicted me. And I wrote a blog about it. I went to bed. I woke up the next morning, had over 10,000 views. I
Hmm.
received 40 emails overnight from people around the world who've been evicted as well. And they said, I read your blog and it resonated. And this has just happened to me. And to find someone who is going through the same thing, can I get your advice? And that's when the realization was like, your writing can take off.
Yeah.
You can impact someone in a foreign country who you've never met, but is clinging onto your every word. And I get that now from young students. I get that now. I also get hate mail, I'll be honest, right? For being a Palestinian in the public eye, particularly with the war that happened recently. That
Because it's
is
your
just,
fault. You caused the war, didn't
yes,
you?
yes, right. And my advice to everyone is don't engage in those conversations. The
Yeah.
best thing is to just smile politely and say, thanks for your message, right?
Yeah.
But come to realize that that's what happens when you write. It isn't in public forum, it's not just about you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And a good reminder for everybody. Thanks for sharing that reminder. I ask all my guests
Yes.
what their definition of success is
Okay.
and how it might have changed from, let's say, 20 years ago.
Oh God. Of course it has changed. I am still an analytical person though, so I set myself goals and I hold myself against those. So my success is against those. But ultimately, I'll talk about the last 5 years, and that it's an insight into my head. The only metric I've measured every week for 5 years, initially with just me, now with the team, is how much fun am I having? And I'm a strong believer you have more fun in your life and you pass the fun on to other people, and that's a good metric. Money will flow, happiness will flow. As long as you've got a smile on your face, then that's good.
Yeah.
So that's
Awesome.
a good success for me.
And it's working for you, clearly.
Yeah,
What would it have been to, if I'd asked Faris 20 years ago, what would you have answered then?
it would have been more get somewhere faster. I was a lot more. I got sucked into that. Need to have a flashy title. Need to beat your peers. Need to and the benefit of age, you realize none of that. It all irons out, and none of it is was the real focus.
You must come across people all the time now, though, in the work that you do, that are still chasing
Of
that
course.
I need to get somewhere, wherever somewhere is, faster
Yeah, yeah.
mentality. Is that, how do you deal with seeing what you were doing, 10 years ago?
Goes back to that strategy point of view. You can build you can tell someone what to do, they won't do it, right? Yes, I'll share stories from my life. I will try and hold the mirror up to them, and sometimes it's okay, right? I was running a workshop for young consultants the other day about a career, and I said it's okay. But if your a whole life is this, then questions have got to be asked. But if it's a 4 year block, that's fine. Sprint for 4 years, but you cannot sprint for a lifetime
Yeah,
because something will suffer.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I don't judge. I'll try and nudge them, but we all have a whole bunch of stuff that other people don't understand that we need to address at any point in our life.
yeah. And that's it. It's a journey, isn't it? And every day is a school day, as they say. And you learn about life and you learn about yourself along the way, and you adjust accordingly, don't you?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. We're all making it up, isn't that right,
We're making it up as we
Ed?
go along. But I have to say, fun is a key word for me as well. And I agree with you. I couldn't agree more, in fact, that, fun is so important because we're all going to die one day. And if you have the choice of having fun doing what you're doing every day and not having fun every day, then why would you choose the latter? That, you know, I think if you have a choice, go for the fun thing, whatever
Go for,
lights you up.
go for the fun.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I've really really, really enjoyed your stories. And obviously, this is your profession. You're a storyteller. You do it beautifully. I can see why you're doing so well. And I wish you all the success in the world going forward. It's been an absolute pleasure, Faris. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just before you go, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for listening. And secondly, this podcast has grown purely through word of mouth. So if you think you know somebody that might enjoy this episode, I'd be super grateful if you could share it with them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then please do, because that will mean that you won't miss any future episodes. And finally, if you're curious about making your own career change, then you might like to join my online group coaching program, which I run on a regular basis. It's named after my book, Ready to Quit Your Job. And I also offer some one-to-one coaching as well. You can find out more about both on my website, which is yescareercoaching.com.